just answering questions with WAPTech, where I answer people's questions when they, in some cases, didn't want one. Now, I'm reading back primarily a comment from one user. I've retyped it in a certain order so that it gets towards more conversational. You can read the unaltered version of this from Papa Zane, aka Nike Flyer 538, and it's at an archive that's labeled IMSPR. IMSPR. But I want to bring up a couple of data points here that are useful. This will be about firearms. And this is a response to someone commenting under my video where I both explained away some of the things that Joe Biden said and explained where they might have come from and gave some context. And I also said that Joe Biden really shouldn't have made any comments at all. And honestly, to be blunt, I apply the same standards of incompetence requirement and competence requirement to Joe Biden as I do to Donald Trump and everybody else. I do not want Joe Biden making decisions concerning firearms. I do not want Donald Trump making decisions concerning medical subjects and many other things. But with Joe Biden, I don't want him to talk about this anymore. And I want him to bow out of it because he's showing a level of a lack of care of what he's saying. He's being reckless or careless in what he says. Period. Also, anecdotal data isn't data. It doesn't mean his heart's in the wrong place or that he's a bad person. And no, it doesn't mean they're coming for your guns. But again, like I tell people, learn to reload, learn to make your own firearms, and stop out and prouting, waving it around on YouTube or on the internet or at your neighbors, and grow the hell up and realize that, I'm sorry, but in the modern era, your rights are whatever you can retain without anybody finding out you're exercising them these days. You might want to get used to that. And no, that doesn't make me a FUD. That's not the word to use. That makes me a coward in some people's minds. But FUD is dumb. FUDs deserve more respect than a geek like me. But anyway, the commenter here decided to comment on my channel, one of many channels I've had over the years, that has, in some ways I don't even understand, I have fixated on firearms to learn about them. Because it's an actual issue that people should understand. Even if they don't ever want to have a firearm, they shouldn't confuse caliber with chambering or cartridge names. The caliber of a gun is not the chambering or the cartridge name. 30-06 and 308 mean things, but some of it means things you don't know what they mean. For instance, 22 calibers started off at one point being a firearms component, a primer. It was called a breech cap, primer cap. It's where the term bust a cap comes from, or cap and ball cap, or musket cap. It came from one of those having a lead ball jammed into the top of it. It's a little metal cup, a really tiny one, with a lead ball put into it, and then using that as the entire cartridge. It was the first example of someone trying to make cartridge ammunition that started going somewhere. Eventually they figured out to make the bottom go from this shape to having squeezed out edges to make a rim so it could chamber and sit into a metal tube. And then they figured out make the primary explosive, hence the name primer, the explosive compound, the impact sensitive explosive, psi explosive. Put it in the rim of it so you hit the rim and it would create a jet of gas. The first one was called a BB cap, because it was a cap with a BB in it. The second one was a conical breeched cap. It had several names, but it's a conical version of the BB gun pellet in there. And by the way, they're not the same size as a BB gun. That word was misused a lot. Then they made it taller and called it the 22 long and 22 short, relative speaking. These could contain propellant, actual gunpowder. And they were based on gunpowder loads. And if you're not aware of it, gunpowder has to be packed pretty tightly into a container to make sure it doesn't have a catastrophic explosion, or not, depending on how you do it, or filled in with some other packing material or a plug. And that's why they would make various lengths of it. Otherwise, they would just make them all long, I guess. Anyway, that was a .222 bullet, or pellet, or whatever, meaning 222 thousandths of an inch, or 22.2 caliber. That's where it comes from. And that's the size of the projectile, not the chambering, because all of these have variations from a quarter inch all the way to an inch or something. There's a lot of variation in the length. Now, this is a weird case where you might look at a cartridge, a bullet, you might call it a bullet, it's actually a cartridge, where you see the casing and then the bullet sitting in it, where the bullet is slightly smaller than the outer diameter of that case. It's usually crimped in. These were made by jamming the bullet in such a way that it would create kind of a shelf around it, and the bullet and the casing were the same diameter. Now, that's a unique situation. That means if you had a gun, preferably one that was made for the long cartridge, you could put the short and shortest and shorty, CB and BB caps in it. And it would work fine. It would still engage it. It's just the rifling would occur further down, and in some cases, these guns didn't even have rifling. Now, what if you wanted to put a much more powerful cartridge in there and it had a really thin barrel? Well, one of the ways to keep it from doing that was to make the cartridge long enough that it would absolutely engage any rifling. So if you had a weak version of it, it would not be able to fit mechanically, and also making the bullet a little bit bigger. So 22 long rifle, and also the extra long cartridge that came before it, had a bullet that was, or have a bullet currently listed anyway, as .223. That's an actual .223 rimfire cartridge. And now we only have the 22 long rifle. Now it has metal bands on it. It's not completely round, nor is it conical, nor is it just a metal slug where it's a cylinder of lead and it's flat on both ends. That's called a wad cutter a lot of the time. But you get the idea that the long rifle bullet is called a .223 bullet because that's its actual diameter. Now this is Wikipedia numbers. Yes, you'll find different numbers. And even on Wikipedia, they'll get the numbers different because Wikipedia uses an auto calculator where if you put in millimeters, it tries to estimate the fractions of an inch and then vice versa. And it's broken because if you don't add in padding, like saying 22300, it'll get the number wrong. And I've complained bitterly on Wikipedia about it. But it is 223. CIP standards in France, which is used all over Europe for it, and SAMI in the United States do not agree because they keep doing rounding errors and or they just don't care. They'll use different standards. Neener, neener. What about the 22 Magnum? Again, this is a bullet that's inside of a casing, and it's one where the bullet's smaller than the casing. You have to have a different chambering. That means that you can't jam it into one of these guns that probably wouldn't be able to take the pressure. That isn't intentional necessarily, but it worked out quite well. That bullet is 224. It is not 223. Now, the 5.56 NATO cartridge that you might be able to look up in Europe and in the United States, it's used in the military, has a narrow range and set of parameters that's much more precisely done. And you'll even hear or see people who are into firing AR-15s talk about the 5.56 NATO and talk about how it's not compatible, or it shouldn't be compatible with 223 Remington. Even though the cartridges are virtually identical, there is some minor differences. The way to make a gun that works with both is just get the NATO version and you can put in the 223. Or you can rechamber the gun, if it has a tough enough barrel, with the 223 Wild. And it's a 22 caliber Wild cartridge. Now in this case the cartridge isn't rimfire. It has a primer cap stuck in the back of a much bigger diameter case that necks down to the 22 caliber that we're talking about here. And of course, because it's called 223 Remington, and because things are totally cromulent and consistent in the internet, obviously, and in reality, that bullet is not 223 at all, it's 224. Now, it says plus or minus a number of percentage of thousandths or millimeters, but the bullet diameter really isn't 223. Now, I could bring in, I was going to do an entire separate video, maybe even a series, on how gun barrels don't actually have a bore diameter that matches. Well, the bore diameter is what they start off with before they put the rifling in, unless it's button rifled, in which case, as the metal gouges into the walls, it pushes some of the metal into the middle, so the bore diameter changes and the rifle diameter changes. The land and groove diameters don't match what you think. And calling it a certain bore after it's been rifled is there's an entire series of arguments on the net and sometimes fist fights over this. And I was going to make a video about it. Now, I've given you a brief introduction to the history of rimfire cartridges that are just 22 caliber. There are many of them. There are 50 caliber rimfires. But the point is, by the way, again, the term bust a cap really did come from this starting point a long time ago. The AR-15 fires a bullet that is more akin in diameter, at least on paper, and in practice in some cases, to a 22 Magnum bullet than the 22 long rifle or 22 extra long. But it is a rimfire 22. Compatible. And yes, you can get one of the AR barrels and drill a chamber of 22 Magnum in the other end, and it will fire pretty well. You can also use that to fire the other ones that are much too small and shouldn't be put in there, but it'll still work. Now, I mention this in passing, usually as a bunch of jokes, and I do it to trigger people who think they're experts because they don't look up shit. Because when you start looking this up, you find out that depending on what state you're in, a 22 Magnum is actually 223 instead of 224. Or the 223 Remington, some boxes, it really is 223. There's a lot of variation. But you can make a 223 barrel, and all of these will go through it because the bigger bullets will squeeze into it just barely. And the bigger ones will go through it because as they're impacted from behind, if it's soft lead, they expand and fit. So it doesn't matter. And someone's going to say I'm wrong about that, of course. Now, let's read the comment for the day. Now, this has been reformatted so it gets to the point at the end. Just finished this video entirely. You normally sound intelligent. I liked your channel, past tense, because you talked about interesting stuff typically, but in any of your other content has this lacking of research or understanding as this one had, you're just plain clueless. It shows that you learned everything about firearms very recently and don't understand much about them. I'm the person who edited one of the pages you might have read to get that information from, but let's continue. Do you even velodog? So anyway, 223 is 5.56. Okay, I dare you to go to the AR forums and say that. Even though I actually agree with you, it's not exactly that, but you're going to get screamed at. I'm not sure if you're just trolling. 233 isn't more powerful than 22 long rifle, hence the word rifle, because one is shot from a pistol and one is shot from a handgun. It's just that they're completely different rounds. That last part's correct, but I'm sure you're aware that the 22 long rifle bullet was originally made for rifle. Now it's mostly used for pistols. And the 223 5.56 cartridges, originally for rifles, are also used in pistols now. So people can legally get away with making, yes, it is a rifle-chambered pistol, but they make AR platformed guns into or from, well, the parts kit, and they make them originally start off as a pistol. Legally in the United States, it has to start a pistol. You can go to rifle length if you want to and turn it to a rifle, but can't reverse it. Except you can, but I did a video on that. But you can't start off with a rifle and make it a pistol. So you have to start off making a pistol, and then you can make it a rifle. And a lot of people do that. Or you could just... Anyway, the point is, you said pistol and handgun as if they're truly really different things. That's true, but it isn't true. It's sort of like me pointing out all the little vagaries and everything else. But you said you just finished watching the video entirely as an edit, which means you posted most of this before watching the video. Was it because it was Biden and you're triggered, or because I made fun of the NRA, or because I made fun of every side by quoting them verbatim because they suck at life? Just one of the dumb things you mentioned. 22 rimfire family is not 223 caliber. 22 long rifle conventional current cartridges and the antiquated extra long, which I actually think is kind of cool, but it really isn't extra long, were both 223 by definition. And yeah, most of the barrels are just 223 for both rimfire and for what's called 22 centerfire, aka the normal rifle barrels that are used in ARs. You're literally just wrong about that. Sorry. Because 2 out of them is that, and the most common caliber, by far for 4 of them, is 222. And it's for antiquated shorts, old school long, and CB and BB caps that were used for shooting targets across the room in a house. And in one case, someone had apparently a shotgun made that way for shooting moths. By the way, if you want to look up velodog, Cooper Centerfire, and all the other centerfire versions of 22 Magnums and 22 long rifles, those are fun to look up. So, in short, or long, your comment here is to denigrate me, and it is assuming that you've watched my channel and like it a lot, but you didn't notice I do a shit ton of videos on these subjects. So anyway, I corrected the person by posting the data we have below, and I hope this has been educational or useful or fun for you. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck.